So I had a lot to say again, and here I am. I wanted to begin by focusing on something that is a huge problem in reconnecting with a toxic parent. They gotta stop thinking that they're not being heard, because you are. They gotta stop hearing that they're not heard when they say, we had to struggle too and we did the best we could with the tools we had. Of course you did. So Gen Z and even some of the millennial generation has said, hey, okay, you guys got us this far, but let's take it a step further. It's evolution. We saw that the screaming, the not apologizing, the avoiding your kids when they share their feelings, the hitting, we've seen the effects of that. You see it in science, where there's study after study saying that these methods create issues between parents and their children. I heard someone say that you don't traumatize your kids by occasional yelling, it's when you begin to use yelling as a parenting tool. It's when the yelling is repetitive and the child is left alone to self-soothe without being taught how to properly work through harsh emotions. That's what creates trauma, and the parent is no longer a safe space. The child stops feeling safe and the disconnect is born. The beginning of distrust, secrets, and space between them is now emerging. It's not easy, but it can be done. The relationship that Lorelai and Rory have is realistic. Say it's not because you haven't seen it up close and personal, or seen it end successfully. Fine, but it's realistic, in good ways and in bad. They are close the way they are because Lorelai listens to Rory. Lorelai gives Rory the space to feel the good and the ugly emotions in a safe space. She also gives Rory space when she needs it too. But also because of their closeness, I'd argue that there's a certain level of codependency between them. I was watching I Love a Mama's Boy, that reality show on TLC, and I won't say too much, but what I will say is that if Rory was a guy and in that show with Lorelai as a mom, oh my goodness. Anyways, let's get into these episodes.
Sierra loves TV. Yes, I made a theme song so that I can talk about all my favorite shows. Oh yeah.
And this is just your disclaimer that this is not me talking about any of the actors themselves, but more so their characters. Please do not attack me in the comments. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, even those who disagree with me. But let's keep it friendly. Alright, let's get started with the show. So right off the bat, we're starting off strong. Something to note is how whenever Lorelai's late, it's always a big issue, but then when Rory's late, Emily is so considerate. Like in this episode and the episode where Jess comes over for dinner, and when she goes golfing with Richard in season 1. Emily is holding Rory hostage and trying to force a night in like Lorelai and Rory's, all because why? Because Lorelai didn't come to dinner because she had to run errands for Rory. It would have been cool to see a scene where Emily looks over at the girls sleeping on the couch and smiles instead of Rory and Lorelai doing that, because it would shift the narrative of, oh, Emily actually does all this because she wants Lorelai to be around, but just doesn't know how to say it. But I just don't hear that that's what they were trying to say with the Lorelai and Emily dynamic. In episode 3, Emily's extending her abuse to Rory this season. Remember guys, Rory to Emily is the good one. She's the Lorelai do-over, and she's always looked at as an angel, according to Richard and Emily. So with that being said, the following events make absolutely no sense. Instead of calling Rory and asking if she really needed or wanted new furniture, she just moved whatever furniture she thought was best right in. And she just let everyone know that not only is she manipulative, she knows that she is. She's openly acknowledging that she is, and she's encouraging her granddaughter to be manipulative. She's viewing buying the furniture as a ploy to get everyone else to view her as being on top, basically. She wants Rory to use the furniture being hers as a way to control her roommates. Thank God that Rory refuses. But there'll be a boatload of people saying that this is helpful. There will be people saying that anyone not delighted by Emily doing this is crazy, and that they themselves would be over the moon if they had a grandma who did things like this. But it's not about the gift. It's about the fact that Emily does not trust Lorelai or Rory to make their own judgment about their lives. She doesn't respect them enough to call them and see where their comfort level is at. Because if she truly thought they were going to be okay with all the stuff she did, and she thought it was all so helpful and that they would love it, what would be the harm in calling and making sure that everything is okay? Like, what would be the harm in that one step? She feels entitled to do what she pleases because this is an investment. She feels everything she does invest into the Gilmore name, and she's going to protect it with her life. Possibly because of the harsh criticism she'd received from Gran or her society, but nonetheless, she's overstepping. And she's just not gonna get a pass from me on that. It's our jobs as people to evolve and aspire to be better people. It's not an easy road, but it's one we all have to walk if we hope for a better future. That future is choosing to be kind and choosing to respect others, and especially yourself, by not allowing toxic energy to drain you. And I feel like that's why the best thing a lot of the time is to go no contact. Rory states her concern, and Emily reinforces the idea that the furniture is a power move and she should be happy about it. Later, Rory and Lorelai have a conversation conversation where Rory tells Lorelai how she still feels unsure about the furniture still being there, and Lorelai reminds Emily of how quickly Emily internalizes a boundary as a sign of disrespect and then turns to manipulation. But Lorelai reminds Rory that her saying that wasn't an attempt to encourage Rory to take abuse. She urges her to say something. She tries to mentally prepare Rory for the reality of that conversation. I feel like that's parenting. It must be really difficult to try and prevent kids from experiencing negative interactions. I think there's something to observe in the conversation Richard and Emily have later at the Gilmores. They discuss how Jason Stiles has called the son of his former boss to come over and speak with him. Most people without context would see that as an innocent meeting. The Gilmores know that in their world, it's a power move. Because why? Because Emily, Richard, Trix, Jason, Christopher, and even my girl Lorelai understand hidden agenda. The Gilmores understand how to use it. They understand that there's manipulation in their world. If that's not the writers helping confirm that with this scene, I don't know what'll convince people that Emily is very calculated and not in a good way. God, being an overthinker really took the cake on this one. Then, right after Richard announces that he doesn't want to talk to Jason, she just tells Richard that she's already went behind his back and invited Jason without talking to Richard first. She manipulates everyone. No one is exempt. I don't know if that makes the situation better or worse. And then look at the anxiety that Rory has when she wants to talk to Emily about the furniture. I just think that's ridiculous. Like, I don't think anyone should have that much anxiety talking to another person. In episode 5, instead of trying to connect with Lorelai, Emily badgers Lorelai about why she didn't tell her that Suki was pregnant, like it was her duty to know. And once again, it's about how she looks to the outside world. Okay, I'm done. Instead of just checking in with Rory while she's talking about the date that she's about to go on, Emily is prying with a million questions without hesitation. It was like Paris was sitting there. Like Paris talking to that kid she always bullies, Brad. Then hearing Emily mention Sex and the City was like, oh my God. I wonder if she watched it and thought that Bunny Dougal was actually a marvelous character and a loving, devoted mother. Jesus. And she's back to blaming Lorelai for everything when Lorelai wasn't even there. Lorelai didn't even know about the boy until she did. I totally understood where Lorelai was coming from, and if you haven't ever had a bad relationship with your parents to the point of not speaking to them, I feel like it's gonna be really hard for you to understand that. Which is fine because, thank God you haven't. Thank God you have not had that experience and that you don't understand because it sucks. But at the same time, if you haven't, you're probably thinking like Suki and you're like, it's not that big of a deal. Why does she have to block Emily out of her private life? Information in the hands of a manipulator or an abuser is very, very dangerous because any information from what you did today could be a weapon for them, which is exactly what Lorelai said. Lorelai has a habit of never feeling safe from or with her parents. She's never truly relaxed around them, which I've pointed out before in previous videos. And Lorelai was right. Not only did the designer speak with Emily coinkadinkly, she told Emily that she'd made Lorelai certain promises. All that Lorelai really wanted was for Natalie not to tell her mother her business about her finances and her personal life, because as we've seen in the past, whenever Emily's involved in her personal life, she tries to take over. Like, she couldn't even talk to Rory, like I said before, she couldn't even talk to Rory about the date without trying to find out some kind of way. Like, just it was just too much. She was prying way too much. She was putting way too much pressure. In episode 6, Emily tells Lorelai a fake story about another company to try and emphasize to Lorelai that without her, she's nothing, that Lorelai needs her help. She's trying to shame Lorelai for not telling her about the company, but why would Lorelai tell her? That's what we need to be thinking about. Why would Lorelai tell her? Give us a reason. Pink. Let's talk about what I feel like Jason represents. Jason Stiles to me represents competition for Emily. Notice that Emily only has issues with those that don't fall in line with what she wants. She maintains a good relationship with Rory as long as she nods along and allows her to overstep. She has an issue with Jason because Jason represents change. Jason changes the way that Richard does business. He introduces Richard to the internet. It's the same reason that we see her have issues with Penelon Lott. Penelon Lott, Jason, Lorelai, these are all people that Emily cannot control. And when she can't control people, she shuts them out and avoids them, as she does with Penelon Lott in episode 9. Something that I feel like we all need to focus on in this episode is, why would Lorelai believe that Emily did all this to humiliate her for nothing? Why would she believe that? Why is that where her mind goes? Like, what is the reason? What has happened to make her think that way automatically. Look how confused Lorelai is by Emily actually admitting that what she did was wrong in the scene where Emily comes to her house. I actually felt for Emily when her party got canceled because I think that's her whole world, and I can respect that. Emily needs things that she can count on, and I think that she's overwhelmed by change. I can see that, but something to also understand is that just because this is her issue in life, it shouldn't be made out to be everyone's issue. If you've ever been to therapy at some point, you learn that a harsh truth in healing from trauma is that while it wasn't your choice to be traumatized, it is your responsibility to heal from it, especially when it's causing you and your meaningful relationships to suffer. And in this case, Emily cannot form a real connection with her daughter until she addresses her own trauma. Take Sheila from Shameless, for example. Sheila experiences agoraphobia, which is essentially the fear of being outside, which seems to stem from a lack of control, similar to Emily. Not the agoraphobia, the fear of not having control. If Sheila was to pretend that her phobias weren't real and refuse to take accountability for how it affects her relationship with her daughter, that would have a much bigger impact on their relationship. And the opposite of that accountability looks like a relationship like Lorelai and Emily. Until Emily confronts her issues, they cannot move forward. And that is with minimal research when I say that, by the way. That's how I view that dynamic, whether it's Lorelai and Emily or anybody else. I think that it is the parent's job to model good behavior, and Emily has a habit of not being able to get her way and shutting people out. Lorelai goes to confront Jason about how he hurt Emily's feelings, and once they get it cleared up, she agrees to go on a date with him. In episode 9, in this episode, the last episode we'll be discussing today, Lorelai wants to go to a game at Rory's college, and a secret about Richard finally comes out. This was one of those episodes where Emily was at her worst. First, they show up to the Yo game and they say things like, well, Rory looks so perfect, why can't you be more like Rory? They treat Rory like she's Lorelai's sister. And let's talk about the beef with Penelon Lott. What is Emily's beef with Penelon Lott? That she almost married Richard? Why not just accept the win and move on? Why completely avoid her unless you feel like Richard is still seeing her, or unless you just don't trust Richard, which is a reflection of your relationship. So I really don't get the beef with Penelon Lott. Like, I don't understand why it's like forbidden to talk to her. Without more backstory, Emily's reaction before Lorelai runs into Penelon Lott again just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Do you guys think Emily already knew about Penelon Lott, or was she acting that way without cause and being immature? After Lorelai runs into Penelon Lott again, and when Penelon mentions knowing something about Lorelai's personal life, it becomes clear to Emily that Penelon might be a little more active in their lives than she was aware of. What does Emily do first? Instead of confronting Richard head on, she takes her anger out on her maid, all because she put Rory's Fig Newtons on a plate instead of a doily, which I don't really get why she would do that when they were like outside. Anyway, she was looking for a scapegoat, which is where Lorelai came in. Lorelai offers to help Emily because she can sense that she's frustrated. She asks Emily if she's okay. Emily says she's fine. Then when Richard shows up, she confronts him about how Penelon knows their business. Richard admits that he's been getting together with Penelon once a year since they got married, which was 39 years ago from that conversation. And of course, because Lorelai keeps trying to comfort her, Emily turns on her too. She blames Lorelai for her knowing about the lunch. She then tells Lorelai over and over that she wasn't supposed to come to her own daughter's college game. If I was Lorelai, I would have went on that date too just to irritate her. When dealing with someone like that, you gotta take your wins where you can get them. In the beginning of episode 10, the Gilmores have Friday night dinner and they do as they typically do. There's no mention of Richard and the Penelon Lott situation, and there's no mention of how Emily treated Lorelai at the Yo game. At the next Friday night dinner, Emily is letting the Historical Society use their house as a walking tour. Richard is making it clear he feels uncomfortable with all the people roaming through his home, and Emily downplays it, getting frustrated with Richard because he won't just suck it up and deal with being uncomfortable. Emily mentions Jason brought a date to another event they attended and makes it clear again that she can't stand Jason. In episode 12, Emily calls Lorelai, and Lorelai makes an effort to tell Emily about her and Jason's secret relationship during the next Friday night dinner. But before she can get the words out, Emily's going on and on about how terrible of a person Jason is. She says that he'd be perfect for her, which is such an insult disguised as a joke, and then proceeds to laugh obnoxiously about the thought of Jason and Lorelai dating, which is a not so gentle reminder for why Lorelai wants to keep the relationship secret. Even though Emily doesn't know they're dating, she's already made a mockery of their relationship, so what would be the point in telling her, knowing that she'd probably go even further into detail on why they shouldn't be together? Something to note is that this episode shows how Lorelai sneaking around to date people she actually likes, and not just someone her mother approves of, isn't actually fun for her to do. It shows that it complicates her life and makes things uncomfortable for her, which in my opinion is totally unnecessary, because I think her mom should just respect her judgment. In episode 13, Emily invites Lorelai to a banquet and makes Lorelai pretend to date Jason, which for once actually benefits her because they can be seen together in public. But my thing about it is. Imagine if it were someone she actually couldn't stand. That would have been a miserable evening for her, and Emily doesn't care as long as other people think that they look good. As I've said before in previous videos, this episode is just another great example of how the Gilmores clearly understand hidden agenda. They understand that something can appear innocent and be full of ulterior motives when they explain how Jason's father just showing up to the banquet could have been him making a move against them. In episode 14, Gran is coming to town and Emily is once again freaking out on Lorelai. We see Lorelai the whole episode trying to get to her hair appointment to make things easier for Emily, and she still gets talked to like she's intentionally just trying to screw everything up. Lorelai was wrong for going off on Suki, but to be fair, as we're shown, her freak out was stress induced by all the pressure Emily puts on her about making sure that she looks presentable. The first thing Gran says when she sees Lorelai is something about her hair not being done, and then she blames it on Emily not giving her enough preparation. But it's hard to feel bad for Emily when she has blamed things that are wrong with Rory on Lorelai often in many episodes before, in the exact same way. Lorelai even tries to defend Emily and Gran doesn't want to hear it. Gran is passive aggressive and talks to Emily like she's a servant. She's very entitled and speaks to everyone like a child, similar to Emily. I think one of the main reasons Emily and Gran don't get along is because Gran gives Emily a taste of her own medicine. Gran decides to pry into Lorelai's financial business and even put her business out there almost just to humiliate her and to point out another way that Emily and Richard are inadequate as parents, blaming them for Lorelai not being more financially secure. I just find it crazy how Gran sits there talking down to Richard, and that's when he decides to say something, but like it was okay for her to humiliate everyone else as long as she has. She mocks Richard's previous business ideas, and Emily just sits there eating it up, reminding Richard he paid the money he borrowed from Gran back in like 2 months. I felt so bad for Lorelai because she's trying so hard to build a better life for herself and chase her dream, but of course capitalism comes into play, and because of money problems and the fact that she can't rely on her family just to give her the money out of kindness, she ends up having a meltdown. But it's just another episode where you see that it makes sense why she doesn't reach out to her family for help, because they help each other and then they throw it in each other's faces later. Even though Richard was young and even though he paid the money he borrowed back in a decent amount of time, he's still being reminded of a time where he made a poor financial decision and where he just needed his mother's help, which isn't normal. Rory is also under pressure. This episode is a lot, I feel like the central idea of this episode has a lot to do with pressure. It's also about changing. There's a lot of shifting happening, from Lane leaving Yale to Suki sinking more into motherhood, Richard finally seeing his mother for who she is. Episodes like these really bring it all together and just remind you of why Lorelai is the way that she is. In episode 15, after not getting to spend that much time together, Rory and Lorelai decide to play hooky, and they run into Emily at the mall, who basically forces them to come along with her shopping. This was the episode that actually inspired my thumbnail. Lorelai clearly senses that something is wrong because Emily's energy is very hasty and aggressive. Both Lorelai and Rory are clearly uncomfortable with all the spontaneous buying, and the moment that Lorelai says something, Emily begins to spiral. So let's break down Emily's meltdown. Emily has taken retail therapy to an insane level. She begins getting loud and causing a scene in the mall, yelling out random things that are making her mad regarding Richard, including Jason, Pennell and Lott, and Richard's company, which are all Richard's decisions that he made on his own, which brings me to my next point. I think that the meltdown is happening for one main reason. Emily has lost one of the only things that she has that keeps her together, which is control. When Richard decided to go into retirement in episode 10 of season 2, he didn't consult her. When he decides to go into business with Jason, he didn't listen to her. When he decides to take his clients to Vegas instead of a party thrown by Emily, he didn't listen to her. She wants the whole family to be dry and barely speak to Pennell and Lott, but she finds out that Richard has been secretly having lunch with her since they got married. She tells him to shave his mustache. He doesn't listen to her. She's not being listened to. But the problem is, with most of these decisions, not all, but most, we're not seeing the harm in him not wanting to listen to her. With the Pennell and Lott situation, he should have told her or respected her enough not to go behind her back, obviously. But it seems that what's really happening between them is that Richard has followed a certain structure in the Gilmore uppity universe for a long time. He's checked off all the boxes on what it means to be considered good enough for Emily and good enough for that society, but now he wants more out of his life. Richard wants freedom and autonomy to make his own decisions. Something I've never considered, though, is that maybe this is all triggering Emily so much because it reminds her of Lorelai. Lorelai also wanted to break away from the forced appearances and that stuffy lifestyle. Lorelai ventured out and became her own person, and as a result of Lorelai finding her own identity, Emily lost a large part of hers. Emily lost control with Lorelai, and she's losing it again with Richard. Emily seemingly loves this world, or she just simply loves structure. She loves being a wife, and she loves these events and not working, and her daughter embodies the opposite of everything that she ever wanted her to be. But maybe this really isn't about Richard. Maybe this isn't even about Lorelai. Lorelai, but about Emily's own resentment towards herself for not feeling fulfilled in her own life. Maybe Emily secretly wishes that she'd done more and taken more risk, and seeing the two main people in her life be brave enough to go after what they really want is causing her to reflect on her own shortcomings. This episode shows us that Emily's constant bullying of her daughter actually is stemming from jealousy. She's jealous that Lorelai has her own life. She's jealous that Rory admires her and that they have such a great relationship, which would explain why she mocks it and is often determined to prove that she can have the same thing or that she can have better. But to me, if she took a moment to just acknowledge the jealousy and confront her own demons, she could see why she doesn't have the things that she wants. Jealousy is not bad. We all get jealous. Jealousy is only bad when it takes form in the shape of Emily's jealousy. Emily allows her jealousy to act out in ways that hurt her daughter and her ability to form strong connections with her family. But unfortunately for Lorelai, Emily lacks the social intelligence and emotional maturity to convey that message. It's almost amazing watching a character so hyper fixated on social etiquette lack the experience to properly express herself. Emily needs control, and when she doesn't have it, that's when we see the most emotion come out of her. What frustrates me is that even with understanding how complex the situation is, before long, we always see how patient Lorelai is with her and how quickly Emily loses her patience with Lorelai. In episode 16, Emily announces her friend Sweetie has died and Richard opts out of going with Emily to her funeral. Gran passes away from a heart attack. Richard expresses his regret about his last encounter with Gran. What happens with Gran passing away is truly unfortunate because it is the definition of what people who care about their parents but are emotionally abused by their parents fear. It is what sometimes causes a person who's in a situation with someone in a position of power to keep being mistreated because they're flooded by thoughts of, well, what if something happens to them? They start thinking maybe it's okay to endure the treatment because I don't want the one time I stand up to them to be the last time I ever speak to them. It's a dangerous mindset that keeps victims trapped. This scene between Lorelai and Richard also gives us more insight on how Richard views the parent-child relationship. Richard feels that Lorelai is forever in debt to him because of the sacrifices he made as a parent, and he feels the same way about himself. While parents do sacrifice a great deal to raise their children, I personally feel that this is simply just parenthood. This is not to say that the parent should allow endless amounts of disrespect, but that when you sign up to become a parent, sacrifice is a major part in the role. I've said this before, but children don't owe their parents simply for being children and needing things that children need to survive. Your child does not owe you anything in return for you doing things that you were supposed to do anyway, that you were obligated to do, because otherwise you'd be in jail. Why does it make sense to some people that they can choose to have a child and then hold the child responsible for needing to be taken care of? And then in contrast, more people find it easier to understand that when they get a pet, that pet will need to be taken care of, and therefore choose not to get a pet. But when it comes to having children, people can't uphold that same ideology. It's strange. This episode allows us to approach the topic of people pleasing. As I mentioned before in previous videos, I was once a people pleaser. I didn't identify with that label for a long time because I always felt like, well, I'm not a people pleaser because I don't people please in this area or this one, or I'm very honest in this area. I was focused more on the times in my life where I wasn't people pleasing, and something all those times had in common was that I was comfortable. For some, it's easier to slip into people pleasing, especially in Black communities or communities of color. The reason I say that is not to say that white communities do not also experience this, but I think that's an important discussion to have, speaking with the knowledge that from a young age, girls in these communities are taught to people please for their survival. And this transcends into people pleasing as an adult in situations that seem to demand it. But what's also interesting is that despite its intention, people pleasing is counterproductive. What I've learned about people pleasing is that once you undo it and start setting boundaries, you quickly realize just how much the people you did it for didn't actually like you. You realize that they just took pleasure in how available you were to them. They stopped seeing you as a person and more so as an opportunity. People pleasing doesn't actually make anyone like you, because the people who don't even notice that you're overextending yourself often don't value you or know you outside of how to use you for their own personal gain. Being silent when someone is taking advantage of your kindness only hurts you, and you trick yourself into thinking that you're keeping the peace. But the more you let someone abuse your kindness and devalue your time, the more they will get comfortable doing it. And soon you'll notice how much more a question just becomes a statement. It's no longer, are you free? It's now the assumption that your time is their time, and God forbid you say no. Once you regain the power in your no, someone who's grown accustomed to you being a people pleaser and doesn't value you might turn on you. I feel like people do not talk about that enough, but it's like you quickly become too difficult, you're too aggressive, you're mean, you're stuck up. Not a person with feelings in a life of your own. Eventually, you'll realize that you'll just keep saying yes, and the one time you really can't do it and have to stand firm on your no, none of your previous efforts will hold any weight. We see this in the episode with everyone involved. Even after Grant's endless resume of charity work, she was underappreciated in her own obituary. Richard spoke up for himself against her, and it instantly erased any of the good times that he'd had with his mother. Emily bent over backwards, trying not to offend Grant despite her feelings being hurt in the process, and it never made Grant think that she was good enough for Richard. And by the end of the episode, on one hand, it's great that Richard chose to bury Grant with his father, but then on the other hand, it's just surreal to me that even after all Emily dealt with, it took her death to make Richard truly take a stand against his mother, other than when they had their last fight. In episode 18, Floyd, Jason's dad, shows up on the golf course attempting to set up a dinner between him, Jason, his wife, Richard, and Emily. It falls on the same day as Friday night dinner, so Lorelai's there. Jason and Richard both take it as a symbol that Jason's dad wants peace. But then Floyd announces that he's suing Richard and reveals that Lorelai and Jason are dating. This episode reveals a lot once again about the world of Emily and Richard. Floyd and Richard are not that different. Floyd presented himself as jovial and innocent at the dinner, just as Richard presented himself as loyal to Jason. But the moment Richard feared that he'd lose his lifestyle or his reputation, he abandoned any loyalty he had to Jason. It's also clear that Jason views his dad's attempt to sue him as a sign that his dad is taking him seriously, which is odd, but again, it's an insight onto how their world works. Jason's dad cares more about punishing Jason and maintaining his pride than anything else. In episode 19, Jason spends a good portion of this episode trying to figure out what's happened with him and Richard is avoiding Jason. Richard doesn't even confront Jason himself. He has his lawyer contact Jason to tell him he's going back to working for Jason's dad. I actually felt bad for Jason because he came from an honest place. Like, he really wanted to tell Richard that he was dating his daughter, and he wanted to keep everything 100% like honest with him the whole time. And it's like one little wrong move, and not only has he lost his business, he's lost like any chance of being able to work, period, because his reputation is ruined, because that's what their life and their world is built off of. Lorelai goes to the Gilmores to discuss why Richard backstabbed Jason. The scene between Lorelai and Richard is truly heartbreaking because Lorelai is basically begging Richard to not backstab Jason because, for one, it's wrong, and because it's going to affect her happiness, and Richard expects Lorelai to care more about him and Emily when, let's face it, they're not her safe space. I don't understand parents that can be so horrible to their children and expect that just because they're their parents, they're owed some kind of loyalty that they haven't put in the work to have, other than doing the bare minimum. Whether Jason and Lorelai are dating or not, Richard was wrong for betraying him. What reason other than financially have Lorelai's parents given her to uphold them over someone who makes her genuinely happy? In what world does it make sense to choose people that criticize you, demean you, and flat out bully you for your shortcomings and for your differences over someone who genuinely just accepts you as you are? Richard doesn't even consider how his choices will affect his daughter, but he expects his daughter to consider him? It doesn't make sense. He cares so much about materials and his reputation that he tells his own child to move away just so that he can do the wrong thing in peace. Not to mention, he lied to Emily. He doesn't even consider that Emily might want Lorelai to stay close, and that Lorelai might actually consider moving away just to be with Jason, which would affect Emily. As Lorelai and Roy are waiting for the next Friday night dinner, you can see Lorelai is feeling very anxious, and it seems like Richard and Emily have forgotten that they were supposed to have Friday night dinner. There's clearly tension between Richard and Emily throughout their interactions, but it isn't really revealed what's going on until Roy and Lorelai leave and come to the conclusion that Emily is not sleeping at the house with Richard. At the end of the episode, Jason and Lorelai break up because Jason announces that he's suing Richard. And what's crazy to me is that Lorelai gives up her relationship out of loyalty to her family, but in the end, it's not even looked at as a moment where Lorelai was actually trying to show that she cares about them, or that Lorelai just cares about them in general. During the first Friday night dinner, Richard and Emily are being passive aggressive with each other at the table. Lorelai invites them to come stay at the end for the test run that she's having. They continue to bicker, and then the season ends with Emily finally confessing to Lorelai that her and Richard are separated. So that wraps up season 4. It took us a minute to get through this season, but I am really glad that now we're going to go into season 5, where I think this is the next upcoming season where things get even worse with Emily and the manipulation. I love that these episodes allowed us to talk about people pleasing, because I genuinely feel like it's something a lot of people are victims to. And because I have personal experience with it, like, I thought it would be interesting to talk about. I think it would also be helpful in the comments if some of you shared ways that you overcame your own people pleasing tendencies, because I'm almost sure that someone is watching this video and kind of wondering how to overcome it, how to stop being a people pleaser. And I think one of the points I was trying to make is that people pleasing is not beneficial, and I think one of the reasons people cling to it so hard as a protective measure is because they think that it's working. There are a plethora of reasons why people choose to people please. I don't think it's always manipulative. I think there are some people that just want to avoid drama, and they're just not confrontational. In my opinion, girls especially are taught to people please from such a young age, because you're not allowed to be like too loud. You don't want to be a bother. You don't want to be someone that takes up space. You're taught to be be more agreeable and quieter. But to me, it seems that that benefits society more than it benefits you. Saying no seems like the hardest thing, especially when you first get started, because you're always worried about what's going to happen on the other side. But sometimes people just need to hear no. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.